Hello, and welcome to another edition of Counseling Connections. We thank you for joining us for our podcast today. This is a bi-monthly podcast where our goal is to give you real talk that is providing you information that is relevant, reliable, and it gives you a sense of how you can live in today's society as a Christian. So today's topic, I'm excited as May is Mental Health Month. So I have a special guest with us today, Miss Ruth Parker Bellamy, and we will be talking about how we make that connection between mental illness and substance abuse. So we hope that you will share this podcast with others, and that if you have any questions or concerns after this podcast, we are both here willing and waiting for you to call us with whatever questions you may have. So today I will have quite a few statistics just because this month is such a powerful month. And we want everyone to have more of a awareness of how mental illness and substance abuse, addiction are so closely related, and we need to talk about it. So let's have some real talk. Let's begin. So did you know, and we have kind of talked about this a little, but I don't think the audience really knows that 17 million adults in the United States have both a mental and a substance abuse disorder. However, only 7% of those people get any type of treatment, and the vast majority get no treatment at all. That is why this conversation is so important for all of us. So as I stated earlier, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and we can together make a difference because our mental health is a part of our total health. You know, it's not something that's separate. It is a part of our total health, just like our physical health, our emotional health, our mental health has to be addressed. And together, we're hoping that you will be enlightened and that we will be able to help others be aware and how we can make an impact on the system that is currently not doing all that could be done as far as mental health awareness goes. So I posed the question, do you know anyone with mental illness and that person also uses drugs? And I asked that question because the two seem to overlap each other. Data shows us that more than 51 million adults in the U.S. are managing a mental illness every single day. 1 in 20 in the United States have a serious mental illness. And, you know, we say 1 in 20 have a serious, but it really boils down to 1 in 5 individuals have some type of mental illness. And I added this other little portion here because there is still such a stigma attached to people that have a mental illness or those that have a substance abuse addiction. And this is going to continue to be a issue and problems with treatment unless we get involved. That we do our part in educating people about what's going on. And that's just real talk. 51 million adults. That is a lot of people. So I wanted to start our conversation off with a guest, Miss Ruth Parker Bellamy, who now has her own nonprofit. And I'm just going to give you the mic and let you tell your story of how substance abuse and mental illness hit home for you and your family and what you're doing about it.
Yes. Well, thank you, first of all, for allowing me this opportunity to share my story and hopefully encourage or motivate others and maybe even save someone else from having to go through what I had to experience.
Yes.
Initially, I was nervous and kind of anxious this morning when I got up. And then during my devotional time, I said, you know what, I'm not nervous and I'm not anxious. I'm excited and I'm so grateful that I'm going to have this opportunity to share my story. And this is also a part of my healing process.
Yes.
Nikki's Total Life Care Center came about several months after my daughter passed. She passed away on May 29th of 2021, less than a year ago, from a drug overdose. And when we got back the toxicology report, she had a number of drugs in her system. At the time, and I must say that when I learned of her passing, it was less than an hour after I had spoken to her. And the last thing she said to me was, I'm going to go and clean my room. She said, I love you, Mommy, because she always said Mommy. And she said, I love you, Dad. And about 20 minutes following that, I got a call from her friend saying that Nikki's unresponsive. So I said, that can't be. I just spoke with her. I got another phone. I said, dial 911. I got another phone call, and at that time, it was the paramedics who were there. And I listened in as they were trying to revive her. And finally, one of the officers who had gone to her apartment came on the phone and told me that they were not able to revive her. So my initial response was shock, unbelief. I can't even describe the depth of the grief that I went through. That was on a Saturday. My husband was with me, thank God, and he's been such a blessing, standing with me, holding me up. Mm-hmm. But the next morning, Sunday morning, I was upstairs and I was praying, I was crying, I was talking to God, I was angry, I was questioning him, I was saying, God, we prayed, Nikki prayed for this. We had been on a prayer line the Friday before, and she prayed and she asked for healing for not just for herself, but everyone else. I just went through this whole thing, and it just came to my mind, it came to me and in my spirit. I did heal her. All these years you have been praying for her healing. You've been praying and she's been praying to ask me to get these voices out of her head and to help her not be depressed and go through all the things she was going through. God said, I healed her. There are no more voices in her head. There's no more suffering. And that kind of, it helped me a lot, even though there still are moments and times because I miss her and that I do cry or go through my emotions. But I always remember that. I always remember feeling, Nikki is healed. She's okay now. And then there was a service with my pastor. And at that service, he said, find what breaks your heart and do something about it. And that just stuck with me. And I said, Lord, there has never been anything in my life that broke my heart like losing my daughter. And I am going to do something about it. Shortly after she passed, I was searching for information to find out, what happened? What are these drugs that were in her system? What was she going through? Because throughout her life, she had struggles, especially during her adolescent and adult years. She struggled with substance use disorders, addiction. Mm-hmm. And I always thought that those symptoms of depression, and she was even hospitalized on a number of occasions. She went through all kinds of things. We even did a program called Intervention on A&E, where they came and interviewed us. But I attributed everything to the substance use disorder. I just felt, and I would even tell her, Nikki, you'll be okay if you just stop getting high, if you stop using drugs. So she did outpatient, inpatient, I did tough love, everything I could think of to get her to get off of drugs. We all did that. Her daughters, my daughter, her sister, my husband, family members, we all talked about her, about the drug usage. I didn't really delve into any mental issues because she was always academically smart. She was in talented and gifted programs. She had such a good character. But hearing voices and all the psychotic episodes and the depression I always thought that if she didn't get high, that she'd be okay. Never really got into the mental issues. And as we know, and as you just said, I think that part of it was because of the stigma and shame. Because to be honest, I've learned so much. I did while she was alive, but since she's passed, I've learned so much about, as you have said, how the mental illness and substance use disorder are a dual diagnosis, dual challenges, and that,
And a lot of times, for most of us, because, a lot of times people start off using alcohol, or it's nothing for teenagers to experiment with marijuana and some other drugs. So we want to put it all on the drugs because drugs have been a little more accepting than to have to say my child has a mental illness.
Right.
Especially in the Black church, we don't typically talk about mental illness. So a lot of times they can be experiencing, like you said, hearing voices and just other psychotic kinds of things that we overlook because we want to not believe that could be happening. But yeah, I believe the drugs are happening because I can see it. I can take her to the hospital. They can pump her stomach and tell me there were drugs in there. But there's no one that can tell me she really did hear voices.
Right.
Or that she was having delusions or hallucinations, that all of it came just from the drug use.
Right.
So at an early age, what do you think were maybe some signs that there were some mental things going on that can maybe help another parent that is in that same situation? Because we know that a lot of times we will use the drugs to self-medicate to quiet down the voices.
Exactly. Well, when I think back, and I've reflected back on many times and throughout all of this, even when she was going through what she was going through, and I try to think of it, what is it? Because she was very, very smart academically, but I noticed she didn't like going to school. But teachers always and counselors always focus on the fact that she was so smart, that it could be just peer pressure or whatever it was. But I noticed she was always quiet with me. When she was in school, it was different because she didn't like going to school and she would act out. And a lot of times when we see our children one way at home, we're not so readily, we can't so readily accept, well, something must be causing her to act out in school. It's not Nikki.
Right.
It's the kids teasing her or whatever it is. So when I think back, she was always very quiet at home. A lot of times she was to herself. She did have friends, but I think and now I've learned some of the signs. Isolating yourself, not wanting to be around the other kids in school. She didn't have a lot of friends in school, but we have a large family, so she did have a lot of cousins that she would be around, and she was seemed to be happy around them. But I think those things that I've learned now about watching the behavior and watching if they're writing things, looking at their writing, if they're isolating themselves, if they're unusually quiet, those kind. If they don't want to go to school because she didn't like going to school, even though she did extremely well in school. Those, I think growing up as a child, those are the things that I noticed then.
And a lot of times kids will act up in school just so they can get sent home.
Right.
Because that's not a comfortable place to be. And if you think back when she was younger and she was writing things that were probably not normal, you don't really take that to heart because we don't want that to be the issue.
Right.
Because
exactly.
I'm sure she didn't get into the drug use until later.
Right. Exactly.
And, probably the skipping school, not going to school, getting high, all those things were a way to mask the psychosis that was going on.
Exactly.
But, just like everything else, when we use it and we keep using it, then we do become addicted to it. Whether that's what the underlying problem started out to be. If you start using cocaine, you're going to keep using cocaine because you want to keep that feeling. That feeling. And most of the time, people that do use drugs, it is because I'm trying to avoid something else.
Yes, the pain.
That's going on.
That's exactly right.
So give us a little bit more about your story and Nikki and.
Well, throughout, like I said, in her teen years, I didn't know, there weren't a lot of signs. And the things that could have been signs to me, I attributed to growing pains or wanting attention, And like I said, with her writing, she would write things, but nothing that really triggered me to think there must be some underlying issues going on here. She was an only child until she was about 8. And so when my youngest daughter was born, then I thought, well, it was because here's a new baby, she's not getting all the attention. So I thought that's why she may have been acting up. But then when she was very, very close because she was an only child at the time, and my mother's first grandchild. And so my mother doted on her. And when my mother passed, I didn't realize how much that had an effect on Nikki. So I think there may have been some trauma there with that. Because after my mother passed, I seemed to notice more behavior changes for the worse, more negative behavior changes. So we moved from New York to Maryland. I said, we're going to go to a better environment. She'll get into a new school. She'll be doing better. Because it was very hard on me when my mom passed, too, because I was very close to my mother. And so when we moved to Maryland, lo and behold, she searched out and she found friends, even though it was a good school. There always, there's a mixture of kids, a mixture of whatever's going on. And I always said, why are you always so attracted to the kids that are not behaving like they should in school or that are skipping school? I would say you're not like that. But in essence, she was seeking that out because they were accepting of her. And again, she started to dibble and dabble with drugs. I think it started maybe with marijuana. And then the next thing I knew, because that was during the crack epidemic, she came to New York for a vacation and came back. And I believe at that time she had experimented with crack cocaine. And then she must have been maybe at around 14, 15. The truancy and the behavior and the acting out really, really escalated. Still, again, I never thought seriously about mental illness because if your child is behaving well in school, she's not giving me a lot of trouble at home except when she's not at home. And then, like you said, the stigma and the shame. My child's not crazy or she's not crazy. She knows what she's doing. But mental illness can be at different levels and comes in many different kind of forms. Because she wasn't walking out in the street or doing some other erratic behavior, I didn't seriously think about it being a serious mental issue. I thought if you stop using those drugs, stop hanging around those kids, you're going to be okay. When I finally realized that there was some more to it, and again, still attributing all of this to drugs, I sent her away to a program, got a scholarship for her to go to this program. She was the youngest one there. She almost completed it, but she left because, again, they were focusing on the drug use, not looking at underlying mental issues that she was experiencing.
So I want to go back and, hone in on two things that you said. The first thing was when her grandmother died. When we have a trauma and we do not deal with that trauma, then that makes the cycle grow,
Oh, yes.
for lack of a better word. You know, so she was already dealing with some issues. And then when she lost her grandmother, that sent her further down the hole to feel that pressure to self-medicate.
Right.
And that's one thing that we have to recognize, and that is one of the things that I try to deal with when clients come in. Let's talk about what got you here. What was the trauma that got you here? And once you can identify what the trauma is, like you've identified, she never went through any grief counseling
Exactly.
for the loss of her grandmother. So she did not have the appropriate coping skills to deal with that.
Exactly.
Then you said she got into an intervention program, which those are wonderful programs, and they deal with the symptoms and the use, but they're not getting to the root of the problem.
Exactly.
And the majority of those programs, you don't talk about God or having that higher power
Exactly.
of what is going to keep you. So I tell all my clients now, I have more than 30 years of experience in counseling. But this is a God thing. And you have to make that connection with God. There are plenty of strategies
Absolutely.
I can give you, but those strategies without the connection with God, knowing that He is able to do what you can't do.
Exactly.
He is able to do what the medication can't do. He is able to do what the doctors cannot do. And until you come to that realization that He is in control and that you need to have that connection with Him,
Absolutely.
that is why so many people relapse. You know, until I got a better understanding, I used to think, oh my God, how can, you hear about cousin JoJo that was in prison for 6 months. He was in there for dealing drugs, and he used to use drugs, and now he's out. And I'm thinking, God, he's been in prison for 6, 7 months. And, the first thing they say is, I'm clean. 2 days later on the streets, high again. I'm like, how can that be? It's because there's no God connection.
Absolutely.
And we have to understand that if we want to make it, programs are wonderful. And I tell clients all the time, go to your doctor, go to your psychiatrist, go to whatever mental health counselor you have. Go. Because this is not a either or thing. You can go to them as well as come to me, because I'm going to give you some strategies, but I'm going to give you some scriptures. And I'm going to be like, did you hear what Pastor said at Bible study the other night? That is really what is going to keep us, is that word of God. No matter how much knowledge we have, if we don't have that anointing from Him, it's not going to work.
Absolutely.
And she almost finished the program.
Almost, yeah. She left, I think, probably a day before she was due to complete it, to graduate from that program. But, I was thinking as you were talking, I think during the times when she was in recovery and when she was doing well, it was when she was going with me to church in New York and the way they embraced her. It was when we were praying more, and it was when we were going to Bible study more, and she would call me, we'd study together more. But then there were times when she would, as people do, slip up and say, well, I'm just going to do this, not thinking you're going to be addicted again or thinking you can handle it because you've gone this amount of time.
That's the enemy speaking in that ear saying, you got this.
But I must say that she knew prayer, the power of prayer. We prayed together. My church embraced her in New York, even here, the few times that she came here. So she knew, and like I said, the Friday before she overdosed, she had been on a prayer line with us, praying for every single woman's specific things that was on that prayer line. But the enemy's always busy.
He is.
And he finds one little way to get in. Right. Yeah.
If it could be something as simple as him saying, well, you just got a little headache. Just take this one little pill for your headache. And that one little pill for the headache ends up, well, that didn't do it. That wasn't strong enough. It's kind of like, oh, I'm not going to take a 500 milligram Tylenol. I need 1,000.
There you go.
And you keep increasing, because you build up that tolerance.
Yes.
And you have to think back, she almost completed the program. So what do you think had her to give up that close to the end?
I think that it was, she always had, I think, of some of the insecurity. And I think because the mental illness wasn't addressed, I think that was part of the reason. And because she got that anxiety to leave, because she did go through the program, but she would call me and say, Mommy, I want to come home. I don't like being here. I don't want to be here. And I would say, well, if you cooperate with them and you do this and you do that, then you'll be able to finish. But it just, I think because of, like I said, the mental illnesses and the anxiety and the depression being there away from family, and being isolated like that, that's what happened, I think that was part of it.
And, and too, when
like you said, there was no God in that program.
No God. And when you think about the reality, I've been isolated in this place for so long. But what's going to happen when I get back to the real world? And those are all things that, we have to think about. And those are things that, you can definitely use in your program as you talk with other parents, It has to be a plan in place.
Yes.
We have to let them know that they're surrounded. They're surrounded by God's love. They're surrounded by their family. And although we assume they know that, sometimes when you're in that dark place, when we say, oh, your family loves you, Satan is in the other ear saying, don't nobody really care about you.
Yeah.
Do you?
Yeah. Absolutely.
You've got to do you.
Yeah, that's it. And she did. And no matter how much I told her how much I love her, that we're there for her, and I would say, well, Nikki, who's there when you get into trouble? It's what we love you. We don't want you to go through this. But when you're going through a mental illness, what I've learned, because I've been studying and learning so much, I'm not a psychiatrist or a social worker, but my experience and my urgency and my passion about learning things, you don't hear that. It's not like me telling you or you telling me. It's when you're going through these things, it's a sickness. If you have a sickness, you can't really hear. You know that you may think that you're not feeling well, but you don't realize I've got a disease that I need to get help with. It's not that my family, she's not going to think, well, my mother tells me she loves me, my sister, my dad is always there. But still, I don't feel good about myself. I feel better when I can mask this pain and deny it.
Right. Because what people don't see, they tend not to address. And
Right.
we can't really see mental illness
Exactly.
unless it is a really deep, schizophrenic type of mental illness. But there are so many more common mental illnesses that people are walking around with
Undiagnosed.
undiagnosed. To know that there's 17 million people that suffer from mental illness and drug addiction, and only 7% get help.
Unimaginable.
So it's real. And,
Oh, it is.
and I appreciate you being willing to tell your story
Oh, yes.
so that we can be a help to other mothers
Yes.
that's going through, because it's hard. And to lose your child that you thought was doing so much better, because we can mask it so well. What else would you tell parents?
Well, something that you mentioned, even with me, thinking that it's one or the other, and even when you realize it's a combination, but they're also a combination of services and help that they need. And so that's part of what I want to do, that there's so many things that need to be addressed, that we have to really pay attention to our children. We have to let them know how much we love them, how much God loves them, but we also have to try and seek help. You have to be your child's advocate.
Yes.
We have professionals, but you have to be the advocate for your child, because you know your child more than anyone else if you're observing, if you're with them and around them all the time. So observe what your child is going through. Listen to them. Listen when they're talking to you, or listen if they're talking to someone else. Sometimes we think that kids, well, they need their privacy, this and that and the other. But if you suspect anything, you've got to be that private eye and pay attention to what's going on. But the most important thing I have that I'll tell is prayer. We have to pray for our children. We have to pray with our children. We have to teach them to pray. But again, we have to be our children's advocate, the best advocate for our children, and find out, learn about what's going on and what's out there, and what's going on with them.
And, like you said, that you saw some writings, and, a lot of times as parents, we think it's just they're going through puberty and teenage and, but if you have a thought, a lot of times God will drop stuff in our spirits that something just ain't right. You don't have to always go to your child. Go to a professional and just say, I saw this in my child's room, or my child has been saying, nobody cares about her. She has no friends. She really dislikes school. She says sometimes she hears voices. You can just go ask, is this normal?
Exactly.
There are some normal developmental changes that we see in teenagers. Most being, I hate my parents.
Yes.
You don't know anything. That's not the way it is these days.
Yes.
That's normal. But what's not normal.
Right.
And, I used to tell my son, you're not telling me anything new. We were teenagers once, so we know some of the things that they're doing and they're going to do, and we tried to do those same things. But we have to recognize when something doesn't seem quite right, it's okay to go ask somebody.
Right.
I have people to call me and just say, what do you think? And I will give my honest opinion. There are some parents that are overprotective, and then there's some parents that are really on it by reaching out. Because journaling is a good source of people to get their feelings out. So if your child is writing stuff in a journal and they happen to leave that journal out and you read it,
that's it.
and it's some disturbing things, as a parent, you need to do something.
Yeah, definitely.
You need to do something.
Yes. And don't be ashamed. Like I said, it's such a stigma and shame, you know, with having a mental illness or even a substance use disorder and a combination of it. But being able to speak, to do something about it. Like I said, we are our children's best advocate.
Yes.
So and Google is one of my best friends. So
Mine
I'll Google.
too.
So yes.
Mine too.
Yes. If I see something or think something, you know, I'm gonna Google it. I'm gonna reach out. I'm gonna look for resources. I'm gonna ask other people, whether it's a family member, a friend, someone at church, because we're all in this. Like you said, we're all in this together.
Yes. To make a difference.
Yes.
Thank you for watching Counselors Connection Real Talk. Tune in next time for part 2 of today's episode.